What's up, everybody? Welcome to a brand new episode of MUT Tips. I'm your host, Sean Taylor from the Made Up Theater. Before we jump in, make sure to like the video if you enjoy it, comment down below with somebody you'd like addressed in a future video maybe, and as always, subscribe on YouTube to be informed of upcoming videos. Now, let's jump into today's topic, 5 tips for playing a stronger antagonist. Before I jump into today's video, real quick, being able to play the antagonist character is so crucial in improv for a few reasons. First of all, it does push us out of our comfort zone because, antagonists are very different from us, right? They have different morals, a different philosophy, they have different objectives and wants, probably polar opposite from you. And to be able to jump into the shoes of this type of character really does help increase your confidence, because being the antagonist, you're not going for cheers or laughs. You want that, that heat, those boos from the audience, right? And I love it when the audience kind of hates me as that type of character. And if you want to learn more about the antagonist, go to MUT Tips episode 16 where I talk all about it. I'm going to talk about different tips here today. So let's jump in with the first tip. Tip number 1 is all about stepping in the shoes of the antagonist, which means you're going to use your body and your movement to help create the character. When I was young, I watched a movie that I don't remember what it's called or who it was about. I think it was based on a true story, a serial killer, maybe Ted Bundy, but I'm not totally sure. But the only thing I remember about this movie is the way the villain moved, okay? Where he took steps, and this helped inform his character and it was a way to identify him. He took steps, but when he lifted his right foot, he would move it almost at a 90-degree angle and then bring it down, just like that. So anytime he took a step, he would turn and rotate his foot before it hit the ground again. And I thought that was really interesting. And in fact, I even did a show where I played an antagonistic character, and I did that in the show. And it did kind of since I had to just so drastically change the way I moved my right foot, it started to drastically change the way I moved my body and acted in the scene. So this is where it's very helpful to actually, do something different about the way you move. A way to practice this is maybe have someone in your house watch the way you move and walk, okay? This was an exercise I had one time where people noted that when I walked, I swayed my left arm, but my right arm was kind of neutral and almost stationary. So that kind of was interesting because they had us walk again. And at that point, I had to actually do something really different and exaggerated. So I clenched my right hand and just kind of made a fist. And then I moved my left hand even more. I just heightened the way I was moving originally, but even more so, It wasn't normal, it was more exaggerated. And that kind of helped me get into a different mindset. So a few other ways you can practice this is, I like to think of fusing body parts together. It's kind of weird, but by not doing a permanent fusion, but maybe fusing your hands together in a way. So maybe your character's like this, or maybe even behind you, your hands are fused behind you, and this kind of gives me an interesting stature. Or maybe you're fused your hand to your elbow. Your hands are fused to their elbows, okay? And this could be the front or even in the back, which also is interesting too. And that can help inform the way I walk. Maybe like this, I walk with more of a march, very authoritative. You can do it even different, like maybe fuse your hand to your chest, It could be one hand or it can even be two. And again, this isn't permanent. Your character doesn't have to walk like this the whole time, but maybe they go to this motion maybe when they're happy or they're feeling kind of a status moment or something, right? Or fuse your hand to your head, just like this. Maybe you just kind of massage your head a little bit or your hair. And these little movements that we don't just do once, we bring them back, help define the character to the point where the audience identifies that character based on that movement. So try that out. Try different ways to use your body and move to get in the character. Tip number 2 comes in the form of establishing a vocal tic or a quirk. Because the more characteristics that you have with the character, the less likely you are to lose the character. This can come in the form of a few things, right? It can come in the form of a word or a phrase that you say after certain sentences, right? Everyone establishes, Matthew McConaughey, says, all right, all right, all right. He barely does that, but you can put that type of characteristic into a villain and it can help define it more. You can say I see, I see, I see. This doesn't mean I have to say that after every sentence, right? When it feels justified, I can say it, because if you say it after every sentence, then it kind of like, lessens the impact of that quirk. It's like doing too much goose in the game of Duck, Duck, Goose. The goose just loses the impact. It's not as fun anymore. It can come in the form of a lot of things, like a sound that you make or a way that you manipulate your mouth, Like what if like in a scene, I just went up to somebody and went, kind of childish, but from a villain, it could be kind of sinister, or like, stuff like that, I could even do like a song, and that could become my quirk. Anything. I could drop some of those like little vocal quirks into scenes when it feels justified. Like maybe it accompanies an emotional moment, or again, like with the movement, a status moment. Like I feel like I'm in an authoritative, setting where I'm the boss, and I can do these quirks, but maybe I act differently around certain people. It's up to you, but like try to utilize like your mouth and the sounds that come out of your mouth to help you get into the character more. Tip number 3 is going with the mindset that you, in your story, are the hero, not the antagonist. Because the best villains in media, they are justified to an extent in their actions, or they're justified in their motivations, or at least they definitely think they are. They definitely know it, but we as the audience can kind of like, we can kind of see where you're coming from, but they take it to an extreme and go too far to the point where we can't support them and we see them as the villain. Like Thanos, for example, in the Avengers. He has kind of a justified reason for doing what he does, He wants to bring balance to life. He wants to, help planets and life survive and thrive because he feels, they're overpopulated and resources are just being, exhausted, and everything's going bad because there's just too many people, but he does so in a bad way. He kills 50% of the population. Come on, that's too far. You kill the people we like, you kill families, you destroy relationships. We can't get on board with that. And the cool thing about having villains who are in their head justified in their actions is they can have an interesting conclusion to their story. Yeah, they can get their comeuppance and be defeated, but they can also have a moment where they arc, see the error of their ways, That's another potential. So by going in with the villain who has a mindset that they are the hero and they are trying to do what's right, that gives you more potential to conclude their journey. Tip number 4 is have relationships as the antagonist, and this comes in a few different ways, okay? First of all, have a relationship with the protagonist. That's very important. I've been in a lot of improvised narratives where it's like almost the antagonist is over here, the protagonist is over here, they're in separate scenes, they're never in scenes together, and they come together at the end and have a big battle and just kind of end the story that way, right? Very unsatisfying because we didn't get to see these two interact with each other, until that moment. And thus, we don't have context for what the relationship is like, how they interact with each other. And we can't get like payoff moments too, that were set up in moments of previous interaction with them. It's kind of like a romantic comedy where like the love interests don't actually get together until the very end and have no relationship until the end. It doesn't matter, right? So have a relationship with the protagonist. Maybe you're related, like you're 2 brothers or 2 sisters, or maybe, the antagonist is the boss and the other person, the protagonist is the employee, or even the other way around, Have a relationship. Also, another important thing, as the antagonist, have relationships with people who you don't see them as enemies to you. Like have like, not saying like henchmen, but have people in your circle who maybe you trust or you respect, right? Like a good type of relationship might be a villain who has like a loved one, a lover, because that kind of gives them a little bit of more motivation when they proceed in the story. Like they want to maybe protect this loved one or, a family member or something. So have those relationships that are, again, a way to make the antagonist less of just like an isolated figure who are like bad guy, bad guy, bad guy. When we see them with characters that they interact with differently because they love them or they have respect for them, at that point, we can see them as more of a fleshed out 3-dimensional character. So try that out. Have relationships. Tip number 5 is have high status, but be flexible, okay? What this means is generally the best antagonists, they see themselves as high status and they surround themselves with people who see them as high status. That makes them the threat of the story, okay? So here's a way to make them a little more vulnerable and to have them be affected to the point where they're almost struggling to keep that high status. That's interesting. So I'll give you an example. Maybe there is an antagonistic character who has just captured the protagonist, you know? The protagonist is like, handcuffed, they're bound, they can't do anything. But maybe the antagonist walks up to them face to face, and the protagonist, as a last-ditch effort of just defiance, spits in the antagonist's face. A one-dimensional antagonist would say, take him away, just like that. It wasn't really affected, just kind of made, an authoritative proclamation to get this scum out of my face, right? But a more fleshed out antagonist would feel threatened. Their status would come down a bit. Like maybe they would get angry and say, take him away, something like that. And maybe we can keep the camera on the antagonist because maybe he feels embarrassed. Yeah, right? He wipes the spit off or like tries to get it off his face. Maybe punches the wall because he's angry, embarrassed, vulnerable. That's interesting. That's way more interesting. So if you're playing an antagonist, have that high status, but cling to it, You're gonna struggle with it because we see a moment of vulnerability, which means we see a moment of defeat for the antagonist, which helps us as the audience think, wow, this person could be defeated. So when we get to the end of the story, that is a more climactic solution to this story because we know they could be defeated, but will they? We'll find out. And ladies and gentlemen, that concludes this episode of MUT Tips. Thank you so much for watching. Again, like, comment, and subscribe. Check out our shows and our classes. They're all online right now. Go to madeuptheater.com for more information. Other than that, I will see you next time for another episode of MUT Tips. Bye.